marshlands of Blackthorn Fen stretched out like a forgotten world, a sprawling expanse of reeds and shallow, murky waters that seemed to swallow sound itself. For Clara Hensley, it was a sanctuary. She wasn't a hunter in the traditional sense. No rifle, no trophies mounted on her walls. Her quarry was solitude, the kind that only a place as desolate as the Fen could offer. Armed with a worn journal, a pair of binoculars, and a thermos of tea, she'd come to sketch the herons and listen to the wind hiss through the tall grasses. The Fen was her escape from the clamor of city life, from deadlines and crowded streets, from the weight of expectations she'd never quite met. Clara had discovered Blackthorn Fen years ago during a college field trip. It was a place few ventured to. No trails, no signs, just endless wetlands under a sky that always seemed bruised with clouds. She'd returned every autumn since, drawn to its isolation. The locals in the nearby village of Greystone whispered about the Fen, calling it cursed. But Clara dismissed their tales as superstition. She liked that it was untouched, unclaimed. It felt like hers. This trip was meant to be like the others. A long weekend in early November, her tent pitched on a rare patch of dry ground. Her days spent sketching, and her nights filled with the soft croaks of frogs and the distant calls of night birds. She arrived just as the sun began to sink, painting the horizon in shades of violet and ash. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and a thin fog already clung to the ground, curling around the reeds like ghostly fingers. She parked her battered hatchback at the edge of an overgrown dirt track, the only access point to the Fen she'd ever found. Shouldering her pack, she trekked through the mire, her boots sinking slightly with each step. The path she'd worn over the years was faint, but familiar, guiding her to a small rise where she always camped. By the time she reached it, the fog had thickened, muffling the world around her. She set up her tent with practiced ease, lit a small campfire, and settled in with her journal, sketching the silhouette of a heron she'd seen earlier, its long neck curved like a question mark. As the fire crackled, Clara felt the tension of the past few months, work stress, a recent breakup, begin to unravel. The Fen was her reset button, a place where she could breathe. She sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her, and let her eyes drift to the stars peeking through gaps in the clouds. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish or the rustle of reeds. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet wrap around her like a blanket. Then a sound pierced the stillness. It was faint, almost lost in the fog, but unmistakable. A low, melodic hum, like someone singing a wordless tune. Clara's eyes snapped open. She sat up, her heart giving a single hard thud. The hum continued, soft and lilting, drifting from somewhere deep in the Fen. She strained to listen, trying to pinpoint its source. It wasn't a bird or an animal. She knew the sounds of the marsh too well. This was human, or at least it seemed so, though the melody was strange, almost otherworldly, rising and falling in a way that felt improvised, yet deliberate. She grabbed her flashlight, its beam cutting through the fog but revealing nothing beyond a few feet of reeds and water. The humming stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the air heavy with silence. Clara's pulse quickened. She'd been coming to the Fen for years and had never encountered another soul. The nearest village was miles away, and the terrain was too treacherous for casual wanderers. So who was out there? "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. It sounded small, swallowed by the fog. No response came, only the faint lapping of water against the reeds. She stood, gripping the flashlight tighter, and scanned the darkness. The firelight cast long shadows, making the reeds look like skeletal fingers reaching out of the mist. She told herself it was probably nothing. A hiker, maybe, or her imagination playing tricks after too many hours alone. Still, the unease lingered, a cold knot in her stomach. She sat back down, stoking the fire until the flames leapt higher. The warmth reassured her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the fen. The silence felt heavier now, watchful. She decided to stay awake a while longer, her journal forgotten as she listened for any hint of the humming. The night stretched on, and though the sound didn't return, Clara felt eyes on her, an invisible presence just beyond the fire's glow. Morning brought a gray, damp dawn, the fog thicker than the night before. Clara unzipped her tent and stepped out, her breath visible in the chilly air. The fire had burned down to ash, and the ground around her camp was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of anyone passing through. She knelt by the fire pit, poking at the embers, and tried to convince herself the humming had been a dream. But as she scanned the clearing, something caught her eye. A faint trail in the mud. Not footprints exactly, but a series of shallow impressions, as if someone had dragged something heavy through the mire. They circled her camp, looping around the fire pit before vanishing into the reeds. Her stomach twisted. The impressions weren't deep enough to be human footprints, but they were too deliberate to be random. She followed them a few steps, her boots sinking into the soft earth. But the trail disappeared into the waterlogged ground. She stood there, staring into the fog, the reeds swaying gently as if whispering to each other. The fen felt different today, its silence no longer comforting but oppressive, like a held breath. Clara packed up her gear, her hands moving faster than usual. She wasn't a superstitious person, but the stories from Greystone, tales of lost travelers and strange lights in the fen, crept into her mind. She shook them off, focusing on the practical. She'd explore a bit, sketch some more, and leave by midday. No sense letting a single odd night ruin her trip. She headed deeper into the fen, following a narrow ridge of solid ground. The fog made it hard to see more than a few yards ahead, but she knew the terrain well enough to navigate by feel. She stopped to sketch a cluster of cattails, their brown heads drooping under the weight of the mist. As she worked, the humming returned, closer this time, and joined by a second voice. The two melodies wove together, discordant yet haunting, like a song from a half-remembered dream. Clara froze, her pencil hovering over the page. The voices were coming from the direction of a small island in the fen, a hump of land she'd never explored because it was too hard to reach without a boat. She squinted through the fog, but the island was just a dark shape, shrouded in mist. The humming grew louder, and now she could make out a rhythm, almost like a chant. Her skin prickled. She wanted to call out again, but the memory of last night's silence stopped her. Instead, she crept closer, her boots silent on the damp earth. As she neared the water's edge, the humming stopped. The sudden quiet was jarring, like the world had paused. Clara held her breath, waiting. Then from the island came a soft splash, followed by the rustle of reeds. Something was moving out there. She raised her binoculars, but the fog was too thick, turning everything into a blur of gray and green. Her heart pounded, urging her to turn back, but curiosity pulled her forward. She had to know what was out there. She found a narrow path through the water, a series of half-submerged stones that led toward the island. Testing each step carefully, she crossed, the cold water seeping into her boots. The island was small, barely 30 feet across, covered in dense reeds and gnarled trees. As she stepped onto solid ground, she noticed something odd. A circle of stones arranged in the center, each one smooth and polished, as if placed with care. In the middle was a small pile of bones, bleached white and picked clean. They weren't animal bones, too small, too delicate. Her breath caught in her throat. The humming started again, this time behind her. She spun around, her flashlight beam slicing through the fog, but there was no one there. The voices were closer now, almost at her shoulder, and she realized with a jolt that they weren't singing anymore. They were whispering. The words were unintelligible, a mix of hisses and murmurs, but they carried a weight that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She backed away, her foot catching on a root, and she stumbled, dropping her flashlight. It rolled into the water, its beam flickering before going out. Panic surged through her. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her journal like a lifeline. The whispers grew louder, circling her, and she ran, splashing back across the stones to the mainland. The voices followed, their rhythm unbroken, as if the fen itself was speaking. She didn't stop until she reached her camp, her chest heaving, her clothes soaked with mud and water. The whispers faded, but the silence that followed was no less terrifying. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by the fire, her knife in hand, listening for any sound beyond the crackle of the flames. The fog never lifted, wrapping the fen in a cocoon of gray. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She was leaving. Whatever was out there, she didn't want to meet it. She packed her tent, her hands shaking, and started back toward her car, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. The path seemed longer than she remembered, the landmarks blurred by the fog. She kept expecting to see the dirt track, but the reeds stretched on endlessly, their tips swaying in a breeze she couldn't feel. Just as she began to worry, she'd taken a wrong turn. She stumbled upon a small shack, its wooden walls weathered and sagging. It wasn't there last year, she was sure of it. The door was ajar, creaking softly as if inviting her in. Against her better judgment, Clara pushed the door open. The interior was dim, lit only by a single candle on a rickety table. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, like old blood. A man sat in the corner, his face half hidden in shadow. He was old, his skin weathered like the shack itself, but his eyes were sharp, glinting in the candlelight. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Clara froze, her hand tightening on the knife in her pocket. "I'm just passing through," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Heading back to my car." The man shook his head. "The fen doesn't let go so easy. You heard it, didn't you? The whispers?" Her blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" He leaned forward, the candle casting deep lines across his face. "I'm the keeper of this place. Been here longer than you've been alive. The fen's got its own rules, its own residents. They don't take kindly to strangers." "Who are they?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man's eyes narrowed. "Old things. Older than the village, older than the fen itself. They sing to lure folks in, to keep 'em here. You saw the bones, didn't you?" Clara nodded, her throat dry. "On the island. They're offerings," he said, "to keep the whispers quiet. But you've stirred 'em up. They know you're here now." She took a step back, her mind racing. "I'm leaving. Right now." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You can try, but the Fen's got a way of holding on to what it wants." Clara didn't wait to hear more. She turned and bolted from the shack, the man's words echoing in her head. The fog seemed thicker now, the reeds closing in around her. She ran, her breath ragged, until she finally saw the outline of her car through the mist. She threw her pack inside, started the engine, and sped down the dirt track, the Fen shrinking in her rearview mirror. But as she drove, the whispers returned. Faint at first, then louder, filling the car with their eerie chant. She glanced in the mirror and saw something that made her heart stop. A figure standing in the road, shrouded in fog, its eyes glinting like polished stones. She slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. Clara didn't stop driving until she reached the city, the lights of Greystone long behind her. She locked her apartment door, drew the curtains, and sat on her couch, her journal clutched to her chest. The whispers had stopped, but their echo lingered in her mind, a reminder of the Fen's hold on her. She opened her journal, flipping to the sketch of the heron, but her eyes fell on something new, a page she didn't remember drawing. It was filled with strange, swirling symbols, etched in her own hand but unfamiliar, like something from a language she'd never learned. She hasn't returned to Blackthorn Fen since. The journal stays locked in a drawer, its pages untouched. Sometimes late at night, she thinks she hears the whispers again, faint and distant, calling her back. She tells herself it's just the wind, but deep down, she knows better. The Fen is waiting, and some part of her fears it always will be.